Hello. Today I'm going to look at easy rose pruning. If we look in gardening books or on the internet, sometimes the idea of pruning roses becomes a little overwhelming. There's lots of terminology being bandied around, like hybrid tea roses, floribunda, climbing roses, rambling roses, miniature roses, etc, etc, etc. And depending on what type of rose you have to prune it in a certain way. Well, I've simplified things. I have the Steve easy method for pruning. So we'll take a look at that and see how easy and stress-free pruning roses can be. Now, let's start with why we want to prune our rose. Now, there are a million and one reasons why we could want to prune our rose, but let's look at a little selection. Now, a simple thing can be what I call fit. It might be growing in a place where it's taking up too much space, or maybe it's on a wall and the branches are growing into the windows or into the roof, or perhaps it's blotting out a great view or becoming invasive and putting other plants in the shade, for example. So the first idea is what I call fit. You want it to fit the space you want it to fill. Another thing can be simply aesthetic. It may look messy, it's not producing too many flowers, in fact it's looking sickly, so you want to do something about it so it looks nice on the eye and produces lots of flowers for you to appreciate, and again the wildlife will thank you for that too. And the last thing I want to look at is the health of the plant. Strange as it may seem, pruning the plant may actually improve its health, which is a strange concept because we're in fact cutting and wounding the plant, but actually that can have some very beneficial effects on the plant's health too. So let's have a look at actually in practice, how do we go about pruning roses? Here goes. The first thing to think about is when are we going to do the pruning? Now, for the big annual prune, I would recommend early spring. Pick a day when it's not too hot and not too cold, and certainly when it's not raining, because rain will help to introduce little microbes into the cuts of the plant, which you don't want. So not when it's raining, not when it's boiling hot, and not when it's freezing cold. Early spring is a good time for what I call the big prune. Little maintenance pruning in the year can be done pretty much any time, but again, as I said, avoid too much heat, too much cold and rain. What tools do we need? Well, first thing is good pair of secateurs, nice and sharp, and it's a good idea to clean the blades with alcohol, white spirit or white vinegar and make sure they're nice and dry. Another thing will be a pair of loppers or branch cutters, which are basically big secateurs, and the same thing goes for the blade, cleaned with as I said, alcohol, white spirit or white vinegar, for example, and nicely sharp and dry. And last but not least, a pair of gloves, because as we all know, roses have thorns and it can be a very painful experience without gloves. So let's get to it. So I'm ready to go. So where do we begin? Now, with any kind of rose bush, and in fact bushes and trees in general, the first thing we need to do is remove any dead wood. So let's take a look at a diagram. We've got dead wood to remove, and also we want to remove crossing branches. Crossing branches will rub together and actually injure the plant and allow infections to enter into the plant. So we need to remove the dead, diseased, damaged wood and these crossing branches. So let's start with that and let's see what the plant looks like afterwards. So now I've thinned out our rose plant. We've taken away the dead wood and the crossing branches. And what I've also done is I've removed branches which are growing in towards the centre. The problem with these branches is they will probably cross and cause the problems we have with crossing branches. But also they will fill the centre of the plant and bring about a kind of dark, moist area where there's not much air circulation, which will encourage funguses and moulds. So in effect we need to aerate the centre of our bush. Now with climbing roses, rambling roses and so on, we can stop there. If you've got any branches which are in the wrong place from your climbing rose, you can remove it. If it's in front of a window or hanging somewhere that you don't want it to be, you can either tie it back with a bit of string or cut it back. But that's it for climbing roses, rambling roses and so on. Stem roses, roses or tree roses as they're known, which grow on a long stem, can have all sorts of different shapes. You may want it to be in a little ball or in a weeping shape or whatever, and there you'll cut it as you wish to get the desired shape you want for your plant. But here we're looking at a normal size rose, and what we're going to do with this is we're going to try and cut it so that it will grow in a goblet shape. Here I have a wine glass. This wine glass gives us an idea of the shape of the plant we want. Nice and airy in the centre, and the branches growing outwards to give us this lovely goblet shape, which is aesthetically pleasing but also allows good air circulation to stop any diseases that might want to attack our plant. So let's take a look at the diagram. Here I've drawn a kind of goblet shape around our rose plant, so we have an idea of what we're looking for. So how do we do that? Now with this rose here, there's the last drastic stage to do. Now with all the other roses, which aren't rambling, climbing and these tree roses I've just talked about, I'm going to cut them all down to about 60 centimetres high. That's about 2 foot high, because we want them to grow to attain this goblet shape that we were talking about earlier. Now when we cut the branches, we need to cut them just above a node, and if you look at the little picture I have here, you will see a node which we cut just above, and we actually do a slanting cut usually, so that the top of the slant comes above this node, which is simply a growing point, and it goes down lower on the stem, and this encourages, we hope, the plant to grow outwards. So you want an outward facing node on your plant, because if it's facing inwards, it's going to grow these famous inward growing branches which we don't want. So I'm now going to work on this plant and we'll see the drastic difference when I've finished. I'm done. It seems pretty drastic, doesn't it? But as I said, this rose will flourish this year after this rather severe prune. What happens the rest of the year? Well, we just deadhead the roses, remove the dead flowers during the summer, which will encourage the plant to produce more flowers. And if there are any dead bits of wood or basically branches growing where we really don't want them, we can just snip them off. But that's it for the big prune for this year. So let's recap. For all roses, we need to get rid of dead wood and cross branches, and also these branches which are growing in the center of the plant. And for our rambling climbing roses, we just train them in the direction we want them to go. In our tree roses, we just shape them as we'd like them. Very simple. But all these roses which are growing as bushes, we can reduce them down to this height. As I said, it's about 2 foot 60 centimeters high. If you've got miniature roses which are lower than that, of course we don't need to do this either, because they're under that level. And that's it. And this will grow into a beautiful flowering rose in the summer, and then next year, just at the start of spring, we'll do the whole operation again, just to ensure that we have a healthy, beautiful, blooming rose. So, as I said, don't be overwhelmed by it. Take your courage in both hands and do a little bit of pruning.